They advanced with absolute confidence. German tanks rolled forward across the frozen ground, infantry moving closely behind them, rifles ready, certain that the American position ahead had already collapsed. To them, this was just another routine push in the final months of the war, another exhausted enemy force about to fall back, another calculation that would end exactly as expected. What they could not see, what they could not possibly understand, was that on this stretch of land stood something no doctrine, no training manual, and no battlefield experience had prepared them for. The unbreakable resolve of a single American soldier who refused to give ground. In that moment, the fate of the battle was no longer in the hands of generals, distant headquarters, or incoming reinforcements. It rested on one wounded young man from Texas, alone, outnumbered, surrounded. As others pulled back to survive, he stayed to fight. And by doing so, he would remind the world why the American fighting spirit could never be measured in numbers alone, and why it would ultimately shape the outcome of the Second World War. His name was Audie Murphy, and on a cold January morning in 1945, he would turn what looked like a certain defeat into one of the most extraordinary acts of bravery in American military history. Audie Murphy did not look like a warrior carved from legend. He was small, lean, and barely old enough to shave when he joined the U.S. Army. He did not come from wealth or influence. He grew up in deep poverty on a farm in Texas, learning early that survival required discipline, sacrifice, and responsibility. By his teenage years, he was already supporting his family, working long days under the unforgiving sun. When the United States entered the war, Audie Murphy did not see glory or adventure. He saw duty. Even then, the Army initially rejected him. Too young, too light, too small. More than once he was turned away. But Audie Murphy was not built to accept no as an answer. He kept trying until he finally enlisted, determined to serve his country in whatever way he could. No one, least of all Murphy himself, could have imagined that this quiet young Texan would become the most decorated American soldier of Second World War. His rise was not sudden, and it was never accidental. Campaign after campaign, battle after battle, Murphy displayed a pattern that would define his legacy. When fire intensified, he did not retreat. When leadership was needed, he stepped forward. When the situation demanded courage beyond normal human limits, he answered without hesitation. Fear was present, but it never controlled him. Across Sicily, Italy, and France, Murphy fought in some of the harshest combat environments of the war. He endured ambushes, artillery barrages, and close-quarters fighting that left little room for error. He watched friends fall beside him. He saw entire units shattered in moments, and yet, time and again, he continued forward. Not because he believed himself invincible, but because he understood something essential about war. Sometimes the survival of many depends on the resolve of one. Among German soldiers, a growing realization began to take shape as the Allied advance pushed deeper into Europe. American troops did not behave as expected. Even when outnumbered, even when exhausted, they fought with a stubbornness that defied logic. It was not just their equipment or their air support, it was their refusal to break. And nowhere would that become clearer than in the battle that would define Audie Murphy. In January 1945, near the small French village of Holzwehr, German forces launched a determined counterattack. Tanks and infantry moved together, pressing hard against an American company already stretched thin. The cold was brutal, visibility was poor, the odds were overwhelmingly against the defenders. From any conventional military perspective, the position was doomed. Murphy recognized the danger immediately. He ordered his men to pull back to safer ground, knowing that someone had to stay behind to delay the enemy advance. He understood exactly what that decision meant. There would be no backup, no immediate rescue, and survival was far from guaranteed. Still, he stayed. As German troops advanced, confident they would encounter little resistance, they had no idea what awaited them. They did not expect a single wounded American to stand his ground. They did not expect discipline forged under fire, courage hardened by loss, and a will that refused to yield. In that moment, surprise turned to hesitation. Momentum slowed, certainty cracked. And there, in the freezing silence, broken only by gunfire and explosions, Audie Murphy began to do what few soldiers in history ever have. He changed the course of a battle by himself.
Long before the frozen fields of Holtzwihr would seal his place in history, Audie Murphy had already learned what it meant to survive where others did not. His first encounters with combat shattered any illusions of quick victories or clean battles. War, as Murphy discovered early, was chaos, sudden, violent, and unforgiving. And yet, in that chaos, he displayed an instinctive calm that set him apart from the very beginning. Murphy's baptism by fire came during the Allied campaigns in the Mediterranean. Sicily, then mainland Italy, offered terrain as dangerous as the enemy itself. Steep hills, narrow roads, stone villages that turned every advance into a deadly gamble. German positions were often well prepared, layered with machine guns, mines, and artillery zeroed in on likely approaches. For most soldiers, these conditions bred hesitation. For Murphy, they forged confidence. He learned quickly that speed, decisiveness, and aggression could disrupt even the strongest defenses. During one early engagement, Murphy's unit was pinned down by enemy fire that made movement nearly impossible. Without waiting for orders, he moved forward under fire to locate the source of the attack, directing his men with clarity and precision, even as bullets struck the ground around him. It was not reckless bravery, it was controlled determination. Officers began to notice that when Murphy was present, confusion gave way to momentum. As the war moved into southern France following the Allied landings, Murphy's reputation continued to grow. In August 1944, during heavy fighting near Ramachul, his unit encountered a sudden German ambush hidden among vineyards and stone walls. The attack was sharp and violent, catching several American soldiers off guard. Where others instinctively sought cover, Murphy charged toward the threat. He took control of a machine gun, fired with deadly accuracy, and helped break the ambush almost single-handedly. German soldiers who moments earlier believed they held the advantage found themselves retreating, stunned by the speed and ferocity of the American response. This pattern repeated itself again and again. At the Lomet Quarry, Murphy advanced across open ground under intense fire to eliminate enemy positions that had stalled his unit's advance. Each step forward meant exposure. Each second increased the risk of death. But Murphy moved with purpose, rallying his men and turning what seemed like an impossible position into a captured objective. After the fighting ended, his uniform was torn by shrapnel, his body exhausted, but the ground belonged to the Americans. What made Murphy different was not simply his courage, but his understanding of timing. He seemed to know exactly when hesitation would cost lives and when bold action could save them. German soldiers were trained to exploit indecision, to pin units down and destroy them methodically. Murphy denied them that opportunity. His actions disrupted their rhythm, forcing them to react instead of control the fight. Word began to spread quietly within American ranks. There was a young officer who did not retreat when situations turned dire, a man who appeared wherever the fighting was fiercest, someone who, despite his size, carried himself with authority forged entirely under fire. Murphy never sought attention. He never spoke of heroism. He simply moved forward when others could not. For the Germans, encounters with American units led by Murphy were deeply unsettling. These were not reckless charges or disorganized assaults. They were disciplined, aggressive actions that came without warning. In several engagements, German troops later reported believing they faced much larger forces than they actually did. The pressure Murphy applied distorted their perception of the battlefield. Confidence turned into caution, caution into hesitation. By late 1944, the war had become a brutal test of endurance. Winter tightened its grip across Europe, slowing advances and magnifying suffering on both sides. Supplies grew thin. Fatigue settled deep into the bones of every soldier at the front. For many, survival became the primary objective. For Murphy, the mission remained clear: hold the line, protect his men, and deny the enemy every advantage possible. Each battle left its mark on him. He was wounded more than once. He carried physical pain into combat without complaint, but it was the psychological toll, the constant proximity to death that weighed heaviest. Still, when the next engagement began, Murphy was always where he needed to be, leading from the front, exposed, unwavering. As January 1945 approached, German forces launched desperate counterattacks in an effort to slow the Allied advance. These were no longer cautious maneuvers. They were determined, often reckless attempts to regain lost ground. Tanks and infantry were thrown forward together, hoping sheer force could achieve what strategy no longer could. It was in this environment of desperation and violence that Murphy and his unit found themselves near the small village of Holzwehr. Everything Murphy had endured up to that point, the ambushes, the frozen nights, the close quarters combat, the decisions made under fire, had prepared him for what was about to come. The Germans believed they were about to overrun another weakened American position. They did not know they were facing a soldier shaped by every brutal lesson the war could offer. And when the attack finally came, it would not be answered by retreat, but one of the most astonishing acts of resistance in modern military history.
The morning of January 26, 1945, arrived wrapped in cold and uncertainty. Near the small village of Holzwehr, eastern France, the American line was thin, stretched by weeks of relentless fighting and battered by winter conditions that punished every movement. Snow clung to the ground, the air cut through uniforms, and visibility shifted unpredictably as smoke drifted across open fields. It was the kind of day when mistakes were fatal and hesitation invited disaster. German forces had chosen their moment carefully. Intelligence suggested the American company defending the sector was vulnerable, low on manpower, exhausted and exposed. The counterattack began with the unmistakable sound of armor. Tanks moved forward deliberately, followed by infantry advancing in disciplined formations. From the German perspective, this was a calculated push meant to crush resistance quickly and reopen space in a collapsing front. They expected the Americans to fall back under the combined pressure of steel and numbers. At the center of the American position stood Audie Murphy, now a company commander. He immediately understood the scale of what was unfolding. This was not a probing attack. It was a determined assault meant to overrun his men completely. Artillery fire intensified. Machine gun bursts ripped across the frozen ground. The German advance pressed closer with every minute. Murphy made his decision without delay. He ordered his men to withdraw to prepared positions at the edge of a nearby wood, where they could regroup and establish a stronger defensive line. It was a calculated move meant to preserve lives and prevent a total collapse. But Murphy also knew something else. Someone had to stay behind to slow the enemy. Time was the most valuable resource on that battlefield, and it had to be bought at any cost. That someone would be him. As his men pulled back, Murphy moved forward alone. The battlefield around him was alive with noise and movement, explosions tearing into the earth, tracer rounds cutting through the air, German infantry advancing steadily behind their tanks. A nearby American tank destroyer was struck by enemy fire and erupted into flames, its crew forced to abandon it as ammunition began to cook off inside. Most soldiers would have moved away from a burning vehicle, knowing it could explode at any moment. Murphy climbed on top of it. Standing atop the burning tank destroyer, exposed and fully visible to the advancing Germans, Murphy grabbed the mounted .50 caliber machine gun and opened fire. The weapon roared to life, its heavy rounds tearing into the advancing infantry. German soldiers who moments earlier believed the American line was broken suddenly found themselves pinned down by devastating fire from a position they had assumed was abandoned. The effect was immediate and profound. The advance slowed, infantry scattered for cover, officers struggled to reorganize their men under fire they had not anticipated. Murphy fired continuously, methodically, sweeping the field as German troops attempted to maneuver. Flames rose around him, smoke choked the air, shrapnel and bullets struck dangerously close. He was already wounded, but he did not stop. From his exposed position, Murphy also directed artillery fire by radio, calling in precise strikes on enemy concentrations. Each correction brought explosions closer to the advancing Germans, further breaking their momentum. What had been a confident assault now became a confused, fragmented push under relentless pressure. For nearly an hour, Murphy held that position, alone, wounded, surrounded by fire. German soldiers tried repeatedly to advance, only to be driven back. From their perspective, the situation made no sense. An entire American unit should have been retreating or destroyed. Instead, they faced sustained, disciplined resistance from what appeared to be a much larger force. They did not know the truth. They did not realize that the fire stopping them came from one man standing on a burning vehicle, refusing to yield. Eventually, Murphy's ammunition ran dangerously low. His voice over the radio grew strained, but his commands remained clear. When the last of the machine gun rounds were expended, he finally dismounted the wrecked vehicle and moved back toward his men, who had watched in disbelief as their commander held off an entire attack by himself. Murphy did not collapse. He did not seek medical attention. Instead, he did what no one expected. He rallied his company and led an immediate counterattack. As American soldiers surged forward, German forces, already shaken and disoriented, began to withdraw. What had begun as a decisive German push ended in retreat. Tanks pulled back, infantry disengaged. The battlefield fell silent except for the crackle of flames and the distant echoes of artillery. Only then did the full reality of what had occurred begin to sink in. The German advance had been stopped, the American line had held, and a battle that should have ended in defeat had been turned around by the resolve of a single American soldier who refused to surrender ground. But the story of that day did not end on the battlefield. What Audie Murphy had done would soon echo far beyond Holzwehr, reshaping how the war remembered courage, leadership, and the true cost of victory.
When the firing finally stopped near Holzwehr, the battlefield told a story that few could fully comprehend at first glance. Burned vehicles smoldered in the snow. The ground was torn apart by shell craters and heavy machine gun fire. German forces, which had advanced with confidence only hours earlier, had withdrawn in confusion. What was meant to be a decisive counterattack had collapsed into hesitation and retreat. For the American soldiers who emerged from the tree line, the realization came slowly, almost unreal. They were still alive, and the line still held. Among the Germans, disbelief set in. Prisoners taken after the fighting struggled to understand what had stopped them. Reports spoke of intense resistance, far greater than expected. Officers had assumed they were facing a reinforced American position, possibly supported by armor that never actually existed. The idea that a single wounded American officer had stalled an entire combined assault simply did not align with conventional logic, and yet the evidence lay before them.
Momentum had been lost, initiative had slipped away, and once that happened, the opportunity was gone. For the American unit, the emotional impact was overwhelming. Many of the men had watched from cover as their commander stood exposed on a burning vehicle, drawing fire that could have killed him at any second. They expected to see him fall. They expected silence. Instead, they witnessed something far more powerful, the transformation of fear into resolve. Murphy had not only held the enemy back, he had given his men something rare in war: belief. In the hours that followed, word of what had happened spread rapidly through the ranks. Officers listened carefully as eyewitnesses described the fight in stunned tones. There was no exaggeration needed. The facts alone were extraordinary. A lone officer had covered a withdrawal, directed artillery, destroyed enemy infantry, and then led a counterattack, all while wounded and under constant fire. This was not a single moment of bravery. It was sustained courage under impossible conditions. For Audie Murphy, there was no celebration. He refused immediate medical evacuation despite his injuries. Like many soldiers at the front, he treated what had happened as simply another mission completed. But command did not see it that way. What Murphy had done went beyond duty. It went beyond expectation. It represented the highest standard of leadership under fire. Formal reports moved quickly up the chain of command. Eyewitness accounts were corroborated. Battlefield assessments confirmed the scale of the German attack and the role Murphy had played in stopping it. There was no debate. The action at Holzweier stood as one of the most extraordinary individual defensive stands of the entire war. When Murphy was later awarded the Medal of Honor, the citation captured only a fraction of what that day truly meant. It described bravery, leadership, and self-sacrifice, but it could not fully convey the psychological impact his stand had on both sides of the battlefield. For the Germans, it was a sobering reminder that American resistance could not be measured by numbers alone. For the Americans, it was proof that determination and leadership could change the course of events, even in the darkest moments. By the end of the war, Murphy had received every major American combat decoration available, along with honors from allied nations. His name became synonymous with courage, not because it was carefully crafted for propaganda, but because it was earned in mud, fire, and blood. Yet, despite the recognition, Murphy remained a deeply private man, shaped as much by loss as by victory. The war in Europe would soon end, but for Murphy, the experience never truly faded. Like many veterans, he carried the invisible wounds of combat long after the guns fell silent. The battlefield made him a legend, but it had also left scars that no medal could heal. Still, when history looks back at that frozen field near Holzweier, one truth remains undeniable. In a moment when retreat seemed inevitable, one American stood his ground, and in doing so, forced an enemy advance to stop, rethink, and ultimately withdraw. And that is why his story would endure far beyond the war itself. When the war finally ended, the guns fell silent across Europe. But for Audie Murphy, the battle did not truly stop. He returned home not as a conqueror seeking attention, but as a young man carrying memories no one else could see. America welcomed him as a hero. Newspapers printed his name. Crowds applauded. Medals rested on his chest. Yet beneath the surface, the weight of what he had endured remained heavy and unspoken. Murphy had done everything his country asked of him, and more. He had stood when retreat was expected. He had led when others could not. He had faced impossible odds and prevailed. But like many veterans of the Second World War, he struggled to adjust to a world that no longer demanded constant vigilance. Sleep was often broken. Silence could feel louder than gunfire. The war had shaped him forever. Hollywood soon took interest in his story. Audie Murphy became an actor, portraying soldiers on screen, including himself in films based on his wartime experiences. To the public, it was a continuation of the legend, a real American hero brought to life in theaters across the nation. But acting was not an escape. It was another way of confronting the past, of reliving moments most men tried desperately to forget. Despite the fame, Murphy remained grounded. He spoke openly about the struggles veterans faced after returning home, long before such conversations were common or accepted. He understood that courage did not end when the fighting stopped, and that survival carried its own battles. In doing so, he gave voice to countless soldiers who felt the same pain but lacked the words to express it. Years later, when people spoke of Audie Murphy, they often focused on the numbers, the medals, the enemy casualties, the battles won. But those who truly understood his legacy knew that his greatest contribution went beyond statistics. It was the example he set, the reminder that ordinary Americans, drawn from farms, towns, and small communities, had risen to meet the greatest challenge of their generation. On a frozen field near Holtzweiler, Audie Murphy had shown the world what that spirit looked like in its purest form. Not loud, not boastful, simply unyielding. One man, wounded and alone, refusing to surrender ground, not for glory, not for recognition, but because others depended on him. That moment did not just stop an enemy advance, it captured something essential about the American character during the Second World War. The belief that freedom was worth defending, even when the cost was unbearable. That leadership meant standing where the danger was greatest, and that courage, once ignited, could change the course of history. Audie Murphy's story endures, not because it is unbelievable, but because it is true. It reminds us that the outcome of the war was shaped not only by armies and industry, but by individuals who chose to stand firm when everything told them to fall back. Men who carried the weight of a nation on their shoulders and did not break. And as long as his story is told, one truth will remain clear. When the world needed resolve, when freedom hung in the balance, America produced soldiers like Audie Murphy, men who stood their ground, changed the battlefield, and proved that even in the darkest moments, courage could still prevail.